Lands. We are meeting today. Thank you. Before us, we have our agenda for February 11th, 2005 for the Nessuna District meeting. Has there been any amendments or adjustments that need to be brought up at this time? No. Can I have someone move receipt? Tom and Kate. So moved. There's no delegations, of course. This is a special budget meeting that takes us right into the report from Craig Stanley on our draft 2025 budget and 5-year financial plan. Craig, I don't think we really need to go over the entire preamble, but will you take us away?
Oh, not again.
So we'll take a pause while Craig leaves and comes back to the meeting. I really wish we could. I wish we could hear him. I want the meeting to go like that. It's fun.
Can we get everyone's mic?
It's not on eScribe. So who emailed the agenda?
So what's not on these?
The meeting today.
The meeting today is just on the website. It's not in eScribe. Yeah.
And then the report is fundamentally this.
Yes, so this is actually my report. Okay. So just through the chair, Craig is going to, so we had the draft budget presentation last time. We were asked to bring some other information.
Yeah.
So what I drafted is a summary of that information and looking at the past 10 years.
Yeah.
And we'll go through that piece. What Craig is going to take you through right now is just give you a little bit of an overview on the asset management in the regional district and where we're at.
Okay, Craig, do you want to give us an audio check?
Yeah, I'll give it another try, Chair.
So slow, so low, ready to go.
Can you hear, Chair?
Yeah, you sound great.
Thanks, Chair, and apologies for not doing that earlier. I'm going to share my screen, and then I will ask Chair to let me know if he can see it.
Craig, your screen's up on the video. Let's go ahead.
Thanks, Chair. So just a bit of a refresher for the commission about asset management as it relates to the S226 financial plan, and just a high level overview at the regional level. There's an asset management project that's been ongoing for a couple of years, and I believe there was a report that went to the board from senior project manager related to the report that came from Roth Iams about how the RDCK could do asset management regionally. But before that, we did have all of the recreation complexes studied in 2021, and Roth came back with recommendations for 20 plus years. And to quantify that in high level terms, the NDCC, the recommendation for repairs and renewals was $8.3 million over 20 years, starting in 2021. In Castlegar, it was $12 million over 20 years, and in Creston, it was $4.5 million over 25 years. I'm not sure why Creston's study extended over those 5 years, but that's just the way they landed. And the recommendations for the 20 years included everything, including the kitchen sink. They even made recommendations about replacing faucets and door closers and light switches. So it was a very in-depth study, but it was a very linear desktop kind of analysis where they took the age of the asset, the condition, and the expected life cycle based on their understanding and the cost of replacing at the point in time, and that's what gave us the data. And there was a very long table that showed over 20 years all of the recommendations, and I could show that with you, but it's hard to show the entire table on one screen. But there's a very detailed plan that did have data that led us in the direction. But I just wanted to point out that the plan in 2021 for the NDCC at $8.3 million. Since then, we've done $400,000 to the boilers, and I believe in the report from Roth, the replacement for the boilers was actually scheduled for further on down the line, even into 2030. But those boilers needed to be done, and then we had spent about $25,000 on rooftop units, which we're spending more on this year. In Castlegar, it was 12 million over 20 years, and we one of the recommendations, or one of the aspects of the Castlegar complex that we did have to replace was the refrigeration floor at 1.7 million, which was not in Roth's report, and it didn't line up with their cycle. And since then, we've actually done some further studies based on the data and what Roth has recommended for further studies, and based on what operations has told us. And we've landed another $4 million in roof repairs for the Castlegar complex, which we'll be working on over the next 2 to 3 years. And in Creston, there was 4.5 million over 25 years. And since then, we've had to prematurely repair the aquatics roof that had some moisture issues and some building envelope issues, and that led to a $500,000 roof repair that we completed in 2024 that wasn't on the table in the same timeline that Roth had presented. So again, a very linear approach to asset management planning, but we have had to practically apply our capital investment to manage our assets effectively. And just to show the table for the NDCC, and the chart shows values on the left-hand side in dollars. So the very top of that chart is 3 million. The bottom of the chart on the left-hand side is 0. But the years from 2021 and forward, it shows a very unbalanced approach to asset management. So in 2027, they're recommending $2.7 million in repairs for the NDCC. That data isn't necessarily valid. It points us in a direction, but it doesn't give us the plan per se for what actually needs to be done. So a lot of that in 2027 included things like replacing the gas supply and the water supply and electrical supply. It didn't make recommendations to things that help the building function. It was really just part of their linear calculation. So staff have been trying to decant that data into something that makes more sense. And the other thing is, some of that data in those years that's not in sync with the actuals, and so I believe it is. I think it's 2030. So the 10th year of that plan, they had us replacing the refrigeration plant, but we're actually doing that now. So their sync and their data wasn't in line with what's actually happening. And if we were to balance this over 20 years, we could straight line balance it at 8.3 million divided by 20 is $450,000 a year. We currently don't have that in our capital plan. And in fact, if we went back to 2021, and as Joe will show you in the tables, we haven't spent that much year over year. And that doesn't include for CPI or any inflationary costs over the 20 years. That's essentially $21. And it doesn't allow for a contribution to reserves. And in Castlegar in 2022, after they received this report, they had done a straight line analysis, and they had said we need $600,000 a year for the next 20 years to meet the 12 million. And they put in, and Joel can maybe speak to this a little bit later, but they put into their plan for their two services a way to increase reserves and save for the future, and also meet the needs of the current asset, including the refrigerated floor and some roofing repair. But even with that, even with raising $800,000 in new money, $700,000, $800,000 this year, up to $1 million in a couple of years, we're already a little bit behind, and we'll have to borrow $900,000 to do some of the roofing work. And another way to look at this for the NDCC, and I know the City of Nelson did a very nice job of doing facility condition indexing. They have a really nice bubble chart that they had shown us a couple of years ago. But it's a calculation based on replacement costs as a percentage of total repairs required. So if we took the data that Roth has presented and we assume that the NDCC, if we had to replace the entire facility today, it would cost approximately $80 million. We do that division and we end up with a facility condition index of 0.103. And according to industry standards, good would be less than 0.05, fair would be between 0.05 and 0.1, and poor would be greater than 0.1. So the NDCC, based on Roth's data, is right on that limit of being in poor condition. Further work is required. So the other thing that came out of Roth's reports that we have been able to implement in Castlegar, because of, we recognize that the roof did need some work, so we hired a consultant to do some assessments, and they came up with a $4 million price tag for us. But additional studies, and we could look at doing structural, mechanical, electrical, building envelope, even hiring a pool specialist, and even a parking lot contractor or an asphalt or a construction contractor to give us more detailed studies on those aspects of our assets that we need. And certainly more importantly, we need better costing on, and we need a better plan for. And that could be packaged into a regional procurement for better assessments and better costing. I'll stop sharing.
Questions? Kate?
Thanks through the chair. Craig, thanks so much for that. With the 1.2 ice plant.
Sorry, a second. Craig, can you pull your screen down?
Oh,
Yeah, Chair, just give me a second. I'm having
That
a
way we
challenge.
can't see when you're texting each other.
Yeah, that's okay.
With the 1.2 million ice plant replacement this year, where would that put do you know where that would put that CFI? Would it shift it down below the 0.103?
Yeah,
is it a living grade?
Yeah, that actually skews that number because the refrigeration plant repairs, as per Roth, was a lot less. And so, yes, that if we were to add that into the data that Roth had, the actual data that Roth had presented, that FCI would go up based on the cost for the refrigeration plant.
It would go down.
It would be higher, so it would be above 0.1.
But after fixing it, do we get into like a fair condition, or are we still poor?
Oh, sorry. Well, yeah, I mean, at the point after we fix it, then we would be forecasting over future years. Then that would come off, and then that could potentially bring that FCI down if we did the refrigeration plant. But in that is also the dehumidifier, which is another part of that we have to consider. But there's also other aspects of the facility, like I said, with other studies that we would do that would maybe help quantify that FCI and pinpoint it over the next 5 to 10 years.
Thank you.
Craig, your screen's still up.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Chair. I'm having a challenging time with Zoom today. I don't know what I even did there, Chair.
Okay, great.
Nailed it.
Any other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you.
Cheryl.
So through the chair, so are we gonna get a copy of this presentation? Because it wasn't attached to the agenda, or at least I don't see it.
Craig, can you circulate to the commissioners?
Yeah, Chair. Yes, I can circulate that.
Okay, great. Okay. Looks like that's all the questions on the asset management preamble. That moves us on into our actual budget discussions.
Yeah, so through the chair, so the numbers presented in the report are the same numbers that you had in the draft plans presented last Wednesday. So just background, because we need to know where we came from and how we got to where we are today. So the first piece, I think, is pretty self-explanatory, but to understand that 2024, the second quarter is the first time that we were back at full operational hours, that we had coverage. Like in particular, that was due to Lifeguard. So we're only 3 quarters into being back at full operation. Requisitions. So what I tried to do in this report is give you each of the what's in bold refers to the chart on the back side of the page. What's important to note, the first thing important to note in the actuals is 2016, 2017. So what happened in that year is that when the debenture renewed, the interest rate dropped. And what Commission chose at that time was to take that drop and apply it to requisition. So there was no strategy about contributing to reserves. So that's just a fact of what happened then. I'll tell you another scenario is that a different service, recreation, had that same thing happen at around that time, chose to take that difference and do those as contributions to reserve for future capital. That service is in much better shape for capital work. 2019 is really the first year where if you're looking at that sheet of where the decision was to actually use reserves to fund operations. So that was about $180,000 in 2019. We actually pull out of reserves, and that's actually funding operations. So that's a point.
Is that the red, sorry, is that this red 127? Got muddled. What is
Yeah,
it?
no, that's okay.
So how is that
So,
one?
yeah, I know it's kind of because it's on two different sides of the sheet.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, 2019, so where you see, so 2018, 2019, 2020 ran small deficits in the service. The 180,000, where you can actually see that is you see the contribution from reserve is about $125,000.
Yeah.
So that money at that point is actually subsidizing. If you look at the requisition for capital, you can see that there's a I'm looking at the pulling from reserves is $260,000. What we're actually expending in capital is $80,379.
And the rest is going to operations.
That's the rest. So that difference is going to operations.
Thank you.
It's those two numbers there.
Okay.
So the service ran small deficits in 2018, 2019, 2020. So comparison of revenue versus operations. So this section shows the relationship between operating expenses and revenue from admission, rentals, and programs. Note that although the percent of revenue covering operational expenses is increasing, the amount of requisition to recover the full cost of the operation is also increasing. So sometimes, the only reason that I point that out is sometimes there's a fixation on what some people will say the cost recovery target. And so in some local governments, you'll hear them say, we want to get to, in this service, the aim of commission for a while has been around 40%. But to note that the actual post that you have to put on that is your service level. So that 40% means nothing unless you have a service level that's attached to it, right? Or else that 40%, if it's 40% of an ever increasing service level, it actually does nothing to control costs.
Go ahead, Kate.
I have another question, although you might already
Yeah.
explain this. When you say at the second to the top line grant, requisition plus grants in lieu, it's hard to know what is requisition and what is grants.
Yeah, so grants in lieu, like the amount of grants in lieu has been pretty stable at around $47,000 a year.
Good to know, thank you.
And just to know what grants in lieu are supposed to be.
Yeah.
Because provincial and federal buildings do not pay property tax, it is supposed to be a framework for those provincial and federal properties to be paying taxes into local services. But it's important to note, it is a replacement of requisition. So that's why I put those two things together.
About 47,000.
But it's hasn't really changed.
Gotcha, thank you, so helpful.
So what service level is, so one of the primary pieces for commission to always consider is that operating hours, programming opportunities, and providing new services, those are the ways that you actually control your operating costs. So that's the kind of stuff that for me over my career, we try to be very careful about coming to you when those things are potentially changing and ask for permission for them. So funding for capital, borrowing, and revenue contributions. So it's the note that funding for all capital expenditures, including the long-term debt, was increasingly being funded by the previous year's surplus. So lower services, particularly in the aquatic center, and increasing revenue are primarily driving that surplus. So what that means is that as we were coming out of the pandemic, we were always planning for full operations, but never reaching it. So we had decreased expenses, but what we saw was still this was increasing revenues. So even though we weren't back at what our operating hours, and it's hot in here, operating hours were for 2000, what we had in 2019, we were actually still actually generating more revenue from less operating. Mm-hmm. So that's resulting in those surpluses. So when we get to the page 2 of the report, so capital expenditures, borrowing, reserve contributions. The important note here is how this decreases to 2022 and requires increases for 2023 and beyond. What's important to note here is that 2015 and 16 is primarily the aquatic center renewal. So that section that says capital expenditures for borrowing reserve contributions. So as staff, we try to look at this as a little bit of a dance between what you put in reserves, what you need to fund in capital that year. And in this case, this service still is carrying the debt of the original borrowing from construction in between 2003 and 2004. Mm-hmm. So those are your capital pieces that are in this budget. But what's important to note is that after 2015, there were no contributions to reserve. So there are $0. What Director Newell was speaking to at the last meeting, you can see that in 2016, we spent really that capital project crossed 2015, 2016. But really there was a $7 million capital project. What we were preparing to borrow for that project. But we got you can see in 2016 under grants funding from capital, that was the federal grant that came in, $4.597 million. So that in some ways kind of provided definitely relief on requisitions because that would have been picked up in borrowing costs. So there have been no contributions to reserves since the last one was 2015, or sorry, not the last one, until we got to 2023 and 2024. So those are the most recent, but 2023, again to note, that $273,000 contribution to reserve is actually primarily from the Provincial Growing Communities Fund grant. So that didn't come from requisition. That came from the 241,667.
253, 193.
Yeah. So what 23 and 24 are starting to show you is that negative number under requisition funding for capital reserves and borrowing, when it changes to a negative, that's actually saying that what's actually happening is that those things are actually being funded by surplus and by the savings in operation. It's not actually being funded by requisition. Your reserve balances are at the bottom of the page. in particular to note that you do have $25,000 in a planning reserve. So you could choose to allocate, that's one of the things you could choose to allocate. And you could choose to allocate that because we have $100,000 in planning work planned for this year, which is a continuation of the work that we did from last year. So you could choose to allocate that. That would be an appropriate use of that fund if that's your choice. The facility reserves, sorry.
Right, just back up. So we can use $25,000 in the planning operations, and we've got $100,000 in planning costs.
Yeah.
Can you guys run that by me again?
Sorry, so you have in reserve that you haven't used. So this actually goes back a long time. So back in about the beginning of 1999, we were doing we were ending a rec master plan. The commission started at that point planning to do another one. So they put some money in reserve for that type of work. It's always been in there. So in the budget, you have $100,000 expenditure. Right now, you're funding that out of just in operations. But you could choose to do a contribution from reserve of $25,000, which would reduce requisition to fund that planning work. So that's the engagement process you're in right now.
The 132 from last year, the consulting fees, is that what it's listed as?
It is, yes, so the 100,000 of that is that project. So that's kind of that overview of going to 2022. So now we're going to flip and we're going to go into planning, which is really what the financial committee is like. So the reason for the meeting is that this year we're projecting that there would be approximately a 12% increase to requisition with not doing anything else. That's primarily driven, that is 100% driven by capital expenditures, borrowing, and reserve contributions. So in 2025, where you got that break a decade ago in the interest rates, that's now shifted back. So interest rates for what we're going to be paying in interest has gone up. So that's the difference between 647 on the borrowing and principal under capital expenditures, borrowing and reserve contributions. The interest on the long-term debt went from 491 to 647. Essentially 648.
Sorry to interrupt. For me, the word surplus feels weird because it feels like, ooh, it's accidental money. But because there's a line for surplus, I think, and tell me if I'm wrong, if I'm misinterpreting it, I think what it means is like money that is not used for operations, so we use it for other things. It's not like extra tooth fairy money.
No.
Okay.
No, so surplus that's on the revenue side in 2025.
Yeah.
So the one in this case it's $1.235 million.
Yeah.
That's primarily from where that surplus was generated.
Yeah.
Was because we were short staffed. So we didn't operate the pool at full capacity for the first quarter last year.
Yeah.
And we had increased revenues.
Yeah, but we're planning that there is a surplus. Like we intend that there would be more money than you need for operations.
No, we don't.
It is tooth fairy money. We're like surprised that it's there.
Yeah. Well, if we had hit full operations, so in that case, we did better than expected on revenue, and we did not complete all the work that was planned in 2024. So for example, Craig went through that the last meeting. So where we thought that consulting for the refrigeration plant would cost around $100,000, it came in at 50. And there were other things like that.
Okay, I don't mean to
And
interrupt.
I think Yev wants to jump in on this one. Yev, are you in the chat?
My question comes from the fact that on the 2024 budget sheet at this date last year, it says prior year surplus 900,000. So it makes me think that we're planning that there is a surplus. So I'm muddled with the
Oh.
word surplus and the line surplus.
Right. So when we're putting it into the budget,
Yeah.
that's based upon our projections for the actual results of the year previous.
Okay.
So if you're looking if you think about where it says 1.235 million in 2025,
Yeah.
that's the actual net difference between expenses and revenue in 2024.
Okay.
So we're looking at what all of our revenue and expenses are. And then we're projecting what that actual result will be, and we put that into the budget. Because it has to stay in the service. Right? Does that make sense?
Not yet.
Just a second. Yev, I'm assuming you have either stepped away or you don't need to, or it was covered?
Oh, there you go.
Through the chair, yes, I think Joe covered it fairly well, that the prior year surplus is the surplus, the actual expected surplus from the prior year that's being brought forward as a surplus could be considered a revenue item in the current year, in the upcoming year's budget.
But then again, if I'm right, as a principal, we don't try and plan to have surpluses because that's not how we shape our budgets.
Yeah.
They happen, but we don't
Yeah.
plan for them.
Yeah, through the chair, no, it's not a plan to have a surplus in the current year. We, for the most part, plan a balanced budget for every single service. By legislation, we're not allowed to plan a deficit, but it would be highly unusual to plan a surplus.
So through the chair, if we go back to the actuals from 2014 to 2024, and we're just going to look at the surplus from previous year. So remember that if you look under 2014, it says 597, 120. Yeah, so I'll tell you where that came from. So remember that came from 2013.
Yeah.
So at that point in time, we had the ceiling came down in the pool in 2013.
Yeah.
We were planning work to be done, which became the pool project in 2015, 2016. So although we were planning for some work to begin in 2014, it didn't happen until 2015. So that surplus then comes forward into 2014. 2015, you can see that the surplus is going down. 2016, in particular year, we were actually planning on borrowing. So there were a couple of years in there where we actually had a plan to start borrowing, and we didn't. So in the first instance, it was because we had this grant opportunity. So we said, okay, we're going to delay borrowing until we know we have to do it. So although we had permission to borrow, we didn't do it, but we had the expenses of borrowing in the budget. So those things move forward. Then you can see that 2017 surplus is 29,000. Then we go into small deficits. 2021, it is 178,601. So what's happening? What starts to happen in those pandemic years is that we're planning for a level of operation that we have no idea if we can deliver because we're not actually controlling our level of operation. Right? So at that point in time, like we're literally, we can open, we got to close. We lay people off. We can open, we lay people off. So when we lay people off, those are savings. When we bring them back on, we're ramping up, we're generating more expense. So we started generating a lot of surplus in those years of the pandemic because operational costs were kind of like were not consistent. So that's where that surplus came from. As we're coming out of the pandemic, the surplus that we carried, that we essentially generated in that time, there was also money from the province to restart. Those kinds of funds are actually now starting to actually fund the debt repayment and those kinds of things. Right?
Yeah.
So those are getting covered off. So it's leaving, taxation is probably moving at a rate that's not with inflation at this point.
And now in 2024, we're back to requisition of 2014. That's, you had a question, right?
Yeah, that's so interesting, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, now I have two questions.
You're allowed to have as many questions as you want.
Thank you. So through the chair, so just while we're on the surplus, which is, so we've now grown in 2024, this surplus is now $1 million.
So in 2024, it's 1.23, the surplus coming from 2024 is 1.235. So that's on this sheet under 2025.
Yeah, the 1 million is from 2023 and 2024.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
so that was so this 1,013,000 is actually from 2023.
So whenever you see it in the budget,
It's from the.
it's from the year previous.
Okay,
That's why it says from previous year.
so question on this surplus, do we get any interest on it?
No.
Okay. And then my second question here is under the capital expenditure borrowing reserve contributions, on this page.
Yeah.
Between 2024 and 2025, borrowing principal and interest has gone up over 30%.
Yeah, that's what we talked about last week.
Okay.
We have
Sorry.
to like redo the, terms of the loan,
Correct.
like double the interest.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I answered for you.
No, that's the answer.
Yeah.
Cheryl, was that both questions
Yeah, that's it.
for now? Okay, great.
Yeah, so
Sorry, was that a hand, Mayor? Or just adjusting your hair? Okay, continue.
So if you look, the line I want is requisition funding for capital reserve and borrowing. So it's right underneath the capital expenditures. So,
Which page, please?
oh, sorry, it's, the budget page.
Great, last,
Yeah.
third one,
Third one.
huge number.
Yeah, some line numbers are always great for these things.
So in 2024, we planned on $71,000 of requisition to fund borrowing, contribution to reserves, and capital expenditures. That's what that 71 means.
Sorry, can you repeat that one, just
Yeah,
what you just said?
so in 2024,
Yeah.
we plan on requisition covering $71,053 of the $1.326 million of that entire capital piece. In 2025, the planning is $447,120. So again, so it's this piece, the capital expenditures, borrowing and reserve contributions, that is driving up that exact difference is between the 2024 requisition and 2025. So I had a question, and the question was about the use of community works funding.
Yes.
So yes, so here is the devil in the details of community works funding. So a direct contribution of a grant into capital will reduce the requisition required for 2025. But it catches up to you the next year. So it is So what I would suggest, like the main problem here is that there's really three primary issues. Number one is the increase in the borrowing cost. Number two is that there's no contributions going into reserve. Number three is that you have a $1.2 million project for the replacement of the refrigeration plants. So no matter what a contribution from Community Works, if you're looking at this budget, you would have to make a commitment to funding capital over a number of years from it in order not to impact requisition. Or else eventually you're going to impact requisition. Right? Does that make sense?
Could I wonder if this is what you're saying? In 2024, we requisitioned 3.56 million. In 2026, we are going to need to requisition 4.
Yeah.
And no matter what you do, that thing's happening over 2 years.
Yeah.
And you can make 25 less, but 26 still needs to be this.
Yeah.
To affect 2026, you need to do capital Community Works funds again to keep that 4 million down.
Right.
And then the subsequent year to keep the 4.2 million down would need to be something from Community Works. Eventually, you're going to hit one of these numbers in the 5-year plan, and we're only at 3.5 million last year.
Correct.
So no matter how you cut it, those numbers are in the 5-year plan.
Right. And so,
How do you want to get there?
right. And through the chair, the problem is that there's not the capital work. And I think this commission has done good work over the last number of years of trying to change that narrative. But you unfortunately got hit with also the increase in the interest rate on the long-term borrowing. So you're getting hit with that no matter what. So, and as was pointed out, ironically, what the taxation is in 2025 looks a lot similar to what was in 2014. What we were as staff trying to tell commission at that time is keep that taxation flat. You can keep it flat for a number of years and you'll be able to put money away into reserves. At that time, we were not predicting a pandemic, but we could put that money into reserves, or in particular at that point in time, we were pointing to this capital work in 2024, 2025. That didn't happen, which is fine. There's always different pressures at different times. But right now, you're stuck with the fact that there's nothing in this budget that really carries a consistent capital line all the way through it. So that's the primary problem. So this is what I would say about the $25,000 of planning money that you have in reserve. It's actually easy to allocate that this year because it's right now, technically, we don't have that in the budget for next year. So if you notice that projected operational expenses, so on that same page where it says it's the second row of between the blue lines, it says operational expenses. Operational expenses we're projecting to go down in 2026.
Why?
Because we don't have a $100,000 for this planning project in there.
Yeah.
And we don't have, this year, we need to repair, we have $40,000. Craig, just correct me if I'm wrong, $40,000 in repairs to the elevator. And is it $50,000 for the batteries in the Zamboni?
$30,000
for the batteries in the Zamboni. So those things are not expected expenditures next year.
Right, that would kind of fall under maintenance and repair, so they're like operational things.
Yes.
As opposed to capital things.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so So right now, so that's why you see, those are the three primary things that are driving that drop in operational expense next year.
And then, sorry, through the chair, but then you're back up right away again. Like you're always, you know, you can cut here and then you're up the next year and then, yeah, you can kick the football down the field as far as you want to go, and then you elect somebody else and they kick the football down the field. And
Well, you could probably find $30,000 to spend on repairs every year. Like you could find, you could be the faucets or the paper towel dispensers or whatever.
well, we never know when the roof's gonna fall on you, so.
Right.
Ceiling. A little bit of PTSD, but what I would say is that amount, like, you're probably smoothing, you're just doing a little bit of smoothing to 2026 with that 25. I don't see it as that's for you to discuss. So if there is a commitment to Community Works this year, which there is a capital project, so that's the good thing, you can actually relate it to a capital project. It's just that you probably need to commit the funding 2026 with Community Works, funding for that capital. And find how we eventually get to the required level of taxation for the service to run over time. So the good news in this 5 year doesn't quite get there, but 2030, the long-term debt is the last payment. So in 2030, there'll be for that, what is in 2029, 595, 197 will be reduced to 46,000. And that's the last payment on the long-term debt.
If we last that long.
But no matter what, that money, right now you're in an asset deficit. You don't have enough money in reserves for the potential capital works that are required. That piece is coming. So you really have for that kind of funding, that kind of work, there's always increasing user fees. And know that the actual only place that we actually do budget a capital replacement cost in the calculation of user fees. It's there.
But it's not being allocated.
But it's not being allocated. It is because budget decisions are year by year by year. So we do have a calculation for how much of that user fee is supposed to be that contribution to capital. Sorry.
Okay, thank you. So through Chair, since we've opened the conversation on user fees, like this is something I do want to bring forward because as a business person, I find that the whole model of the user fees is very unfair. Like we've got the City of Nelson, Area F and part of Area E are paying through taxation heavily to fund this center. And then people like me from Balfour or Area G or Area I come and use the facility and pay the same amount. And I don't think that's fair. And I think that people who are paying through taxation should get a discount. And the people who are not paying through taxation should pay a higher fee. And interestingly, there's also a precedent for it in this area because Area E doesn't pay into the library. So when people from Area E go there, they pay a membership fee, where the other people who are paying through taxation do not. And I heard on the news this week, and I can't remember if it was the city of Langley or the township of Langley, but one of them has a rec center. And the other one is using that rec center, and they are now looking at a surcharge for the other side. And I think in fairness and given the situation that we're in, that user fees should, and I realize it would be more administratively heavy, but if you had the map of where the taxation was right at the entrance, and it's like, well, do you live in here? No, okay, your entrance is $5 more than the people who are already paying for it. because this is significant, like, if you're an average house in Blewett for $650,000, with this 12% increase, you're paying almost $400 a year. And the people who like live in Balfour, like me, and I'm coming there and I'm paying the same, I just don't think this is fair. And I think we should be thinking about things differently. And I never get an answer on how many user fees or users come from outside the area. But if you have 100,000 users and you say 20% of those users are from outside of the area and you charge them $5 extra, that's $100,000 right there. So it's just my thought, one of my thoughts.
So great question. Let's get a sense of scale and scope. Unless Janice wants to respond in kind.
Through the chair,
Okay,
perhaps,
Janice?
Mr. Trico could, share with, Commissioner, Graham, the previous report that we did on, we've done this report, so maybe you could have a copy of it. So this report has been done about charging, user fees, differential rate on user fees. I believe,
Yeah, through the chair was,
Treasurer Buell was here at the time when we did that, so we do have a report that's already been done.
yeah, pre-2000, I think it was pre-2019 or 2019, somewhere in there. The administrative cost to the benefit, so here's the problem in the regional district. Area I residents do pay into a facility. It's just not this facility, they pay into council. Area H residents do pay into a service, it's just not this service. So, when you're looking at, we're one corporation, so trying to figure out who it is that's actually not paying into a major rec service is actually pretty complicated. People are contributing to different things. Caslo and Area D, they're paying into an arena service. Like Area K, they're paying into an arena service. So like everybody is contributing in some way in the fabric of the regional district. When we looked at it in 2019, the administrative costs would most likely, it is not a simple calculation. The administrative costs were pretty much a saw with what you would generate in extra. Where it becomes, if it was only a city of, and this I'm not saying that the NDCC should only a city of, where it's got that kind of a defined boundary, so like it's much easier in a municipality, we're paying, nobody else is, everybody else, if you're not a City of Nelson resident, pays extra. That's actually a more simple administrative thing, but it's still, as Trish had to administer that system in Trail,
Yeah.
it still is a huge administrative burden, and you have to ask whether it's actually increasing revenue. It actually, and Trish could talk about that at a different time, but I will get you the report, which ironically doesn't quote Trish, but Trish was one of the main sources of information for that report. But I'll pass that report on.
Is that satisfactory for now?
Yeah, I'm interested in the report, but like I still, to me, it doesn't, if you're not paying into this particular facility but you're going there, like it doesn't, to me, it's like, because I'm paying into the one in Castlegar, but I want to use the one in Nelson, like that would be a choice that I would be making. And like I still, as a user, think like I'm choosing to go there. So if I'm not paying tax into it, then I should pay more. Like I just think it's fair.
It's just then that becomes a ripple effect all the way through the chair, all the way around the regional district.
I think one place this can also kind of find some equity is we've been talking about doing work about having your active pass have more universality across recreation services, which will be a place where you scan and you're in Castlegar, you have a membership in Nelson, and there'll be a place in the Perfect Minds offer to allocate a benefit. We'll have a better sense. It's not about the tracking though, but it then creates that opportunity that we're all paying into a rec service. We all use the Active Pass system, and it gets us access to the entire regional district recreation services. And then we know people who are paying for memberships in Castlegar, how many of them are coming to Nelson or Creston and back and forth. Like, that is a different way of approaching it, but it gets you fairly often to the same spot. Unless you still have pockets that aren't paying for any recreation service, they're still getting a benefit, but I think they're much fewer now than they used to be. Who's not paying, if anyone? We've got Rec 10 out in the defined area.
In terms of contributing requisition, Rec 10 that's probably that's the area that's paying least to the recreation fabric of the.
But even they are paying to the recreation fabric. Pennies. Okay, so conversation's continued. It's a conversation's been here since I got here 6 years ago. But let's get the report. Let's keep talking about it.
Yeah, so through the chair, like, the one thing is that this year, every year that we do fees and charges, so the one thing that the board can always ask is to look at the distribution of expense between fees and charges and taxation. So, for example, like the fees and charges document says that an adult doing admission is to pay a fee that's somewhat representative of 50% of the cost of providing that service. A youth is 25%, and children 5 and under are free, and adults 75 and older are free. So they're 100% subsidized. So that's where that conversation really takes place, to try and shape this balance between user fees and requisition.
Commissioner Morrison?
No, you already kind of talked about that elephant in the room, and that was just around one of the other ways is that you could increase fees to people that don't contribute to recreation, or I'll just say it because it seems like nobody wants to say it. Your rest of your area, Cheryl, could participate in taxation, which has always been a concern for a number of years at this table. And if you have that taxation, I guess one of the things that I've never seen is if we put that into the calculation, how much does that reduce the individual's taxation, right? Because that would obviously be contributing to the number that we have to meet. Now there's more contributors. To me, I'm not a mathematician, Commissioner Tate is. That would suggest to me that you're saying $400. I'm thinking that that would be less because more people are paying. So that would be one way to reduce the individual person's taxation hit, is to actually have full contribution from area need. But you're not going to debate that issue because I know that that's a really sticking point, but that's just the way it is.
And I think, that's a fair comment, so that's very fair, but I mean, the further you are away from the facility, the less likely you're going to be using it regularly. Like if you live down the street, you might use it 3-4 times a week. If you live in Belford, you only probably come into town once a week.
Yeah.
So the odds are that you would use it, and I know from the area residents out there that if we did put a referendum forward for that I'm fairly confident it will fail. And so the last thing I want to do is put money towards a referendum that I really believe has no hope of passing. And that's why I think it is more fair that those residents from Area E should pay a higher user fee. And like that would, and then if they don't like that user fee, then the option becomes, well, if you don't want to pay the user fee, the higher user fee, then would you like a referendum? And then you can pay it through taxation. But just as it is now, they don't pay a higher user fee, so there's not really an incentive. And to just ask people to pay more taxation, like who likely aren't using the facilities on a regular basis, would be a real tough question to ask residents.
And I just, if you don't want to share, I just, the argument about how far away you live, because that was the premise for this to start with. I live in the city of Nelson, and I used the facility once in 2024. So this idea of proximity to an X is not a strong argument, and I would hope that we would see, perhaps it gets tied to the 2026 election, that perhaps we test the water and see, because I hear from a number of people who live in Harriet Proctor, who live in the Belfort area, that they have no issue with paying taxation. So I think sometimes there are local people that get to hold the fort, which is great, because that's what democracy is about. But we're also not hearing from a certain sector. So it could be time at some point here in the not too distant future, not 2025, to go into the water again, to look at contribution, because we never see the math. Like I would like to see what the math is when we're concerned about what the increase is to the individual participant in the service.
Through the chair, if the commission would like to see that we can do that calculation, it's not the kind of calculation as staff we would do normally unless we are asked to give it.
I am hearing that people would like to see the calculation. Do you want to put that forward as a motion? Moved by Commissioner Morrison.
Second.
What exactly is the calculation? Sorry, just want to clarification.
So through the chair, what it would be is that we know what the rate per thousand is of the participants in the service. So we would add the assessment from the portion of Area E that is not paying into the service. We would add that in, then get the rate per thousand again, and then do a subtraction of one from the other, and you would know what the potential savings to the people that are already in the service would get from their participation.
Point of clarification through the chair. Will we base it on 2024, for instance, and then we're at 0.536,
Yeah.
and it might go down to 0.512 or something. Got it.
Get to
Okay.
the same total, yeah.
Yeah.
Based on the same requisition.
Yeah, I got
Got
you.
it. Yeah, okay, thank you.
I would just remind the commissioners and ourselves that recreation is a community good. Whether you use that specific facility specifically by your own self, Mayor Morrison apparently does not use it. But, and Commissioner Newell has brought it up a number of times that you need facilities to attract young families, economic growth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So while I acknowledge the argument of people aren't using it and don't want to pay into it, Mayor Morrison also doesn't use the elementary.
So, and we do have a gym in Belfort too, and we do have a lot of community, societies that are providing recreation services out in that area as well.
Right, but for the doctors and the HCAs and everybody that lives, that provides.
So anyway, so my view is I would prefer to see an increase in user fees as opposed to taxation, which I believe the referendum will fail and we would spend money on a referendum needlessly. And I am hearing from Fluid residents, and I think you'll hear that today, that some of them are looking to be removed from the service in Area E. So that's some of the pressure that I'm getting.
Fair enough.
So that is one of the things that I had suggested today, was to talk about an increase in user fees, increase in community works grants, and just an increase, like I think when we go out into taxation and we ask people on fixed incomes to pay more, we're basically asking them to live on less. So I think when we do that, it's important that we demonstrate that we're trying as government to find savings and efficiencies as well. So that would be something that I think would be really important to highlight in our conversations of what we're doing and what staff is doing to find efficiencies, because when we're asking people for them to find efficiencies so that they can pay more money, that we can demonstrate what we've done.
That's, okay, so we've got on the motion on the floor to get a calculation of bringing in that additional assessment role and seeing what that impact on the rate per thousand is. Does that math give us enough to determine an approximate surcharge for an external contributor would be on the user fee side? Like, could we tease that out of the gap? No.
Through the chair, it wouldn't be out of the gap. It would be if you included, you would never generate that money from an extra fee charge because you'd have to collect enough money from an individual who is using it to somehow equal what the whole group would pay. Or you could say average house is blah, blah, blah cost. If they were participating, they would pay X, and then you charge X as the surcharge for for being able to come in.
Okay. Janice?
And just to be clear, what I'm asking for, because I've never seen the numbers, and I've been here for a really long time, but I don't expect them next month. I realize the RCK is in the middle of budget preparations. We're not gonna have a referendum next week, so they're not gonna be paying tax. But I think that we should see these numbers sometime during the course of 2025, so we can contemplate and then figure out whether there is some kind of information, like you just asked, Chair Page, of how we look at that number. But when we don't have any number, I'm just guessing. So I would like the work done. I'm not going to, when it's done, it needs to be accomplished in 2025.
Okay. All those in favor? Pass. Thanks very much. I just want to comment there. Just keeping in mind that the requisition that we're looking at in 2024 is inflationarily the same as 10 years ago. I think where we're seeing major impacts is there's been that shift in property values, rural to urban comparatively. So you're seeing in that rural area an increased amount of rate per or an increased amount of actual absolute contribution because those property values have gone up comparatively to Nelson, which has been the big shift we're seeing. That's where the cost is coming from. The service itself, $3.5 million in 2024, $3.5 million requested in 2014. Is that a hand? Nope. Okay, let's move on. How's everybody doing? Do we need a bio break? Can we go to 10:30? Okay, we're at 10:15. Let's break for 10 minutes till 10:25. So,
You can receive the budget, source the budget.
probably going to see it like an 8% or we're going to see something spread out here.
I'm telling you what their options are.
Okay. Yeah, we're going to.
So that's going.
Sorry, so like the options are tribute from the planning to the series.
So knock it down 25.
That knocks it down 25. Yes, you could fund your, but
How much do you guys have?
An updated number. Can you contribute anything from the city or you allocated it?
Well, let's talk to Janice and see where we're at with that. I feel like we're over it.
That's what I thought. And I'm not, on it because we still have to get the 4 million.
Well, we saw that asset management writ large in here.
Yeah.
Where eventually we'll get to a place where community works will probably get sucked into that.
Yeah.
So we're not.
So I'd rather, so I'm with, and when I look at these numbers, I'm ready to strangle. And then I'm going to go to the wash. Because did I learn anything over the last 10 years?
well, no,
Yes,
you are, but you argued it even.
I know, we both did.
Just start calling it the new tax cut.
I bet it does.
Okay. got him reelected. I feel like
You know, it's what's funny today, is we're still talking about budget, and not every one of them.
Their revenue.
We're not, no. There's no Dave, there's no.
I was glad, I was like, that's sweet.
But you know, but the problem is.
I tend to like, the person who doesn't use the facility, so my thing is it's about.
They just think that their perspective is the only, but they also think, they also different. Than they also, they also, their perspective is the only.
Your systems, finally caught up.
Do we need to adjust that? There's a lot more. Should we allow for public time?
months now for the process on how a referendum occurs, and we are being stonewalled. So I'm going to just make that public that we are requesting to know what the process of a referendum is, and that Area E be given the option to ask residents, the whole area, if they want to participate in this service, 226, I believe, or not. Or if there's an option as well that we can consider instead of a percentage of your assessment, is it possible that we just all pay an annual flat fee versus it being on a tax roll? So that's, those are questions that I am putting forward, and I'm hoping to hear a response to those within the next week would be beneficial. I will be communicating via Cheryl.
Chair? May I?
Go ahead, John.
Wouldn't we just ask Mike Morrison, our corporate officer, to respond? Like, could you send an email to Corinne and Mike saying, what's the process for withdrawal from a service? I'm sorry, I just thought I'd interject that.
That's fine.
Yeah, through the chair, we could ask Mike to do that, yeah.
Okay, so we'll have Mike send that information out and just include commission and,
Yeah, I'd like to,
yeah, just it's always good as a primer to know.
yeah, once the debt's paid off, 2030 comes along, what's the process for people to reevaluate?
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt, guys. Was that an official direction to staff that I should note, or?
Yeah, Mike Morrison should.
So moved. Direction to staff.
Yeah, so moved by Newell. So any seconders? Cheryl, all in favor? Pass.
Right, thanks.
Could you just
Okay.
clarify? Sorry, the mic was only turned on partway through her.
Just, sorry, yeah, so the direction to staff is to send out the procedure for what a referendum of withdrawal would look like to Director Graham and Corinne Maury and distribute to commission.
Referendum of withdrawal. Okay.
Yeah, and we'll get to you in a second.
Through the chair, Alana, just the process for withdrawal from service.
Yeah, just the process.
In some cases, there isn't, so.
Okay. Sorry, and just state your name and where you're from. Sorry, we should have done that for Corinne, but she's,
Area E West.
what was the name?
Yeah. And,
Mo.
yeah.
Okay.
The,
Go ahead,
I'd also like to, referendum is a good idea. Also an opt-in for people who want to opt in. I think she's saying that people in here would want to pay taxes. Well, put it on much for that, but if they can afford it, great, opt in, put it on your thing, check that box and they can pay. We're struggling, I think everyone's struggling, inflation, taxation, hydro, everything's going up. If you're a landowner, you're especially getting hit, right? So if you're just trying to buy like 34 plots of land, trying to build a house, you get hit. Just everything. And it wasn't that way 15, 20 years ago. And we're just really struggling to make it live, small family. And I'd like to hold on to what I have. And it just, everywhere just seems to be going up now with this more taxation on this recreation. And I think you guys work within the budget. I mean, the budget's $2 million. You're just going to have to cut that. Everyone operates that way. Everyone operates that way. They work within their budget to operate. Why can't this aquatic center work the same way? And just, try different grants, but don't use them as to operate to that point. We can have to operate with the money. But it's going to hurt. Probably not community services is going to hurt, but without money, it's not like money. Only the money for it. So it's
Appreciate it, Mo.
Can I just comment? I really appreciated the conversation, and I wanted to reiterate and say it back to you so that I understood it correctly. And please, is that okay? Can I do that?
I'll allow it. But
Thank
it's
you.
on the
Normally, I'm
line.
not allowed to talk to public during public time.
But we just don't want to get into debate.
No, not at all. No, I just want to say it back to you. It sounded like you said that from your perspective, it would make the most sense to just stick with whatever the previous budget was without doing any increases, and whatever that amount is from like the previous year. And then however the services have to be cut to stay within that makes the most sense to you. Am I understanding that correctly?
yes, you stay within the budget, the taxation that's been allotted to those
Yeah.
programs. Now beyond.
Right, okay, thanks so much, really appreciate it.
Okay. Jim?
Thanks. Actually, pretty much been covered. Cheryl mentioned, the economy of reduction, reusing. I think she covered that, and Joe understands that's my position on that. The other point I can make quickly is I can't get bogged down in all these numbers. I'm not smart enough. I do see the forest, even amongst all the trees, right? And the trees are all the numbers. For me, the forest is when I look at my taxing, when we started this process, what year was the referendum, Joe, that brought us?
2023.
No.
Oh, sorry.
The first one, 2020.
Oh, sorry, 2003.
That's what I thought.
Sorry.
So when it was brought in, I was told I'm going to be paying $100 a year. That was the average. That was given as an average. I'm now paying 5 times that. Some of my neighbors I spoke to last night are paying 8 and 10 times that. Assessments have gone through the roof, right? So I don't get how the original assessment, you needed $100 a year from us. Now, 20 years later, you need 10 times that, or 8 times, or 6 times that. So I don't know how that works. I'm not a guy who do budgets or anything. I'm really lousy at it. But I think that going to another referendum is kind of the nuclear option, right? And I thought maybe there's a way to avoid that. I'm a hockey player. I love them. 3 times a week I play hockey. But if you have to move to a model that the user pays and I have to pay $40 or $50 to play hockey, that's a decision I'm going to have to make. But I don't think it should be downloaded on all the people, which is what is happening. The rest of it, I think, has been covered and well covered. So thank you.
So I will remind, just for if you haven't caught it in the other meetings, Jim, we have done that fees and charges allocate cost analysis on fitness. We've done it on the pool and adjusted rates, and work plan for 2025, 2026 is to look at the ice in the same scope with that same bylaw. We haven't gotten there yet. So that work is ahead of us. So we anticipate there'll be some adjustments on those ice fees, because ice is a huge cost driver within the service.
The peasants are rumbling.
The peasants are rumbling. My feet shake often with the rumbling of the peasants.
Thank you.
And I think I'm probably one of the peasants. So based on my bank account. Anybody else? Sorry, just state your name and where you're from.
Karen Shondell from Lewitt.
Karen? Okay.
Yeah. So I've listened to the last couple of meetings. I'm like Jim, it's numbers like numbers. What I know is my income, my pension does not go up, but my hydro costs do, my taxes do, and I'm really sick of it. And I know people who are on the verge of losing their homes. Good people. For no other reason than taxes. RDCK is a big part of that. You guys are increasing staff exponentially. You just like, you want to do projects, great. Then just like, oh, well, just need more money, get it from the people. It's not working anymore. Like he said, peasants are rumbling. People are really struggling out there. And I don't think probably any of you here can appreciate it because you're not in the same situation. So many people don't have work anymore. They can't keep up to the costs, the assessments, the taxes. The only way to grow an economy is to lower the taxes. You're killing the economy as well. You need a responsibility to the people as a whole to cut back. I'd love to see RDCK take on cutting back 20% in all areas. We have to do that. I have to cut back. When my expenses go up, my income doesn't. What do? I don't have taxes I can pull from. I don't have like a bank I can just pull money out of to make it up and do more projects. And I'd really like it if you could keep that in the forefront of your minds every time you talk about it. Because it's heartbreaking. And this community is really suffering already for many reasons, and I'm sure you can understand some of the other reasons. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Okay, anyone, there's a few people online. Is there any public online that want to speak to this budget at Rec 5? sometimes harder on the internet, so we're gonna,
There's a pause, I wouldn't mind this.
Tom, will you fill the pause while we
I'll
wait?
fill the pause. I try and ensure that everyone knows that the provincial government provides a program that allows people, a really good really good program that allows property owners, homeowners in their primary residence to defer their property tax payment. Now, of course, most people know this, but the way I frame it is this, and it kind of got triggered by Jim saying, my house has gone up in value so much, and now I'm paying more of a percentage of Rec 5. Well, the flip side of it is my property taxes were $2,600 last year, before grants and everything, I think gross taxes. And out of that, 55% of that goes to the regional district. The other 45% goes to hospital, province, police, school, all of that. So 55% of your tax is RDCK, but of that, 10% of it for you people is your Blewett Fire Hall. So you're paying for the fire hall, and hopefully you actually make money on that deal. So because your insurance is way reduced beyond what you pay for the fire service. So that's a push. So you can take that 10% and say, I'm making money on that 10%. So then you're left with 45%. And when I did the exact calculation, it was 2020. I don't think I did it last year. So it might be 2023, 2021, 2019. So the numbers are fairly static in percentages. So you're left with 45%. Of the 45%, the biggest two chunks out of that 45% are where we are today, Rec 5, and basically our garbage thing for Central. So, but however you want to frame it, that might take up 30% of the 45%. So that's how it breaks up. So that's what we're talking about here is no doubt the biggest ticket item with garbage, fire, and this that is in your property tax, which is 55% of your bill. But then I frame it this way. My house went up. I'm the same as you. I live up on Heddle Road there. And my house, I can go back to 2011, 2009, and my house has gone up in value as all of ours has. But then I thought one day, well, if my house, let's say it's gone from 500,000 to 800,000, so I technically have $300,000 of equity that I've made over those years. Okay. In the last 10 years, I have saved $22,000, $23,000 by not paying my taxes.
By deferring them.
By deferring my taxes at 1 or 2 or 3%, depending on the year. It's actually a very good interest rate. So my house has gone up 3, and I will owe, if I sold today, $25,000. So it's gone up $300,000. I owe $25,000. So I just made $275,000 without doing anything and not paying my taxes. And I can still deferring my taxes, and I still leave my estate, or I have a house to sell to move to my old folks' home or whatever, which is the only reason I have a house is just to keep accommodation as I get older and older and older and older. So I only share that I share it for 2 reasons. One is options available to people as pressures happen. There's no doubt that there are financial pressures everywhere. We feel it doggone $1 million ice refrigerator thing we're talking about. When we first mentioned it in 2019, it was 500,000. Now it's $1 million.
No.
So I share that piece as an option for the reality that everything is going up. And I'm not talking specifically about this. And that it's actually pretty good financial management in a way to do the deferral. It actually makes sense to save that $200 a month and invest it in something else. And if I invested that money, I'd be money ahead. I wouldn't even be down. But anyway, I just thought I'd address options for people that are really in financial challenges, that is a legit option, especially with an increasing house value.
If I might, through the chair, just because this young gentleman here who's declared that he was 34 years of age.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Unfortunately, tax deferral doesn't work for you. What you left that
55.
number, it's 55.
55.
And it's not income driven. Anyone can do tax deferral. The province of British Columbia, once you get to be the age of 55, if you're the primary home.
And live in it, yeah. Sorry, I didn't
So it works for some people.
addressing your concerns, so.
Okay, but
Thanks
the
very much,
comments are
Chair.
still sit with the whole commission, so they're well
I
heard.
didn't address you're right.
No, thank you. Any other comments? There's one more person out there, two more people. Okay, seeing none, we're gonna keep going, just pick back up where we were with our budgets, before we get anywhere else. Joe, is there anything else you wanted to cover here?
No, just that there are options. Options are to, outside of service level options are, the contribution from the planning reserve. Really don't think would be a good choice, but you could increase the contribution from reserve. That just really does increase risk in next years. Or you could fund with community warrants or other forms of grants.
Janice, did you have go ahead.
Yeah, no, I had a question. I'm just like, while we're having this discussion, I've thought, and my apologies, that I wasn't able to be, in the room, that I think that we had asked for what the hours, what the cutback would be if instead of 12, it was, I think we just picked 8 as a number. So we weren't going and doing this budget several times over with like, whether it's 9.5 or 2.6 or 11.9 looks like. I think we sort of landed on a ask of what did it look like at 8 and what would be the level of service reduction. Carried through, because of course I couldn't see that.
Yeah, no, it's like the recommendation I was direct off the prayer break of how requisitions and user fees are distributed. Prepare an option that puts more funds in reserves and lists suggested tax increase by dollar figures for an average household. The piece I didn't get done was the average household.
But I learned how to do that, so.
Yeah,
thanks.
sorry, I didn't get that part.
I do recall, through the chair, I do recall asking for that, but it probably just didn't get collected because there was so much happening.
So if it would be
Who's been touching the furnace?
Well,
Me, I was freezing.
Now it's like, oh, you turned it up?
the
23.
the room doesn't really ever have a constant temperature.
He's been doing it at Parks too.
Oh, he does that. Okay, that's what probably.
He needs more sweaters. Maybe the new chairs will have beers in them.
You need to sit on the interior side, it's supposed to be the exterior side.
We'll get you a little heating pad, cozy little blanket.
A shawl.
You know, we should have some little like throw shawls. You're doing like 1 degree at a time, or you like?
Yeah,
you
no,
jumping
down
that
to
out?
22, so.
Okay, we'll just let some math land. So,
That's almost like closing for a month.
To go to 8%?
Yeah,
so 12.
because again, what's driving, through the chair, what's driving this is you're actually not getting rid of the expense that's driving the increase in the requisition. So it's actually not 8%, it's actually, it's like double. Because the price, what's driving the increase in requisition is the borrowing interest and capital.
Yeah.
That's what's driving the requisition.
So one of the considerations I had, one of the things I thought we might be able to consider is we're saying because we're so close to the cost of the surplus that we're not going to borrowing. And while it does have an impact on the absolute cost on the long term, what would it look like to go to borrowing to fund some of this capital so that our surplus is, so we're spreading this, so because we're looking at 3% increases in 2026, 2027, and 2028. But if we added borrowing costs in there, that'd be more like 4 or 5%.
Yeah, so through the chair,
But not 12 this year.
yeah, you'd have to, you'd borrow over 5 years at the max. And I have a
Jeff, do you want to,
Through the chair, I'll jump in and just, I was in another meeting, I'm back to this one. The discussion around borrowing, you would also have to consider whether to use reserves rather than borrowing. With borrowing, you're paying a higher interest rate than you're receiving on reserves, but that then lowers your reserve amount. So that discussion needs to probably take place as well.
Sorry, what's on the table right now, going to 8% and using the community work fund and then somehow in the future borrowing?
Oh, sorry.
Sorry,
So,
just to be clear, mention to somebody, is that the city of Nelson has no community works fund
I
to contribute, so
fully allocated?
for us, that's not on the table.
Yeah,
So,
no, I got you.
yeah, our funds are committed.
Thanks. That was my question.
Yeah.
I thought that was the case.
No, I have that, because once that was asked, I thought, I don't know enough for that, but our funds are committed.
And Tom was just doing calculations that it would be about a $20,000
A month.
payment to borrow $1 million over 5 years.
At 5.5%, so I just picked the number. So that's 240. To save $1 million 1 year, you're adding 240 every year.
Yeah.
For 20 years.
No,
5 years.
Five.
Because if it's more than 5, then we have to go to
Extra 200,000.
referendum.
250,
What's the interest on that 20?
5.5.
Absolutely though. Like the cost, the interest cost.
250.
Total interest is about 150 over the 5 years.
So absolute cost. So the spreading costs you $150.
I think I know the answer to this, but I'm gonna ask it anyway.
For clarity.
So we're through the chamber to Joe. Is it possible for areas F or E to use community works grants to fund our share of the tax? No.
so no, because it doesn't come off like one side of the ledger's requisition. Requisition is the requisition for the whole service area, so it just gets entered in as a funding source, and then it benefits all taxpayers in the service.
I would go back to Commissioner Newell's point at the beginning of our conversation that we still have to get to 4 million in 2026, one way or another. And we still are not putting any money away for the next big expense. It sucks. It sucks so much. But we are in a position now where for 10 years, we haven't saved any money. So all those little kids who were in their first year of swimming lessons are now teenagers and using the workout gym facility. and we haven't put any money away. It's time for us to do the better planning. It's time, it sucks, it's so hard.
And this is the consequences of us doing that better planning, because we plotted this out.
Yeah,
We started to make these changes in 2020, 2021. And they're just kind of coming to bear. And we've seen this in the 5-year plan coming for us.
yeah, so last year we
And
knew that there was
we
gonna be a
were
big jump.
quite lucky. It was great to see the facility run so well that we saw the surplus we saw. We are not budgeting for the surplus next year. One would hope things would stay on a course, and that that surplus would also show up. Even though some of it
It's
is.
not that it was bad decision making then, it's just that now we are here at this new space of decision making, and inflation has been crushing us. And like, my mortgage went up, like it almost doubled from 2020 to 2024. My mortgage payments, I get it. It's tough. And we're looking at community good for when, long past when I'm using the facility without using the facility. I think we're just in a really tough spot.
Okay, we're just giving Joe lots of space to do this calculation. Go ahead. It's not to Joe.
Okay, so through the chair, I'm curious why this ice plant is so expensive.
Great question.
Craig?
At 1.2, or refrigeration plant at 1.2 million. Because if this was the case, like I couldn't see any rink in the province of being able to operate with a 1.2, like why is this so much money?
Let's let Craig jump in there.
Through
Craig, you have the idea of that?
Yeah, through the chair, the original, as Director Newell pointed out, the original estimate from 2019 was about $500,000. Since then, we've had various studies and assessments. The most recent before the one we're doing right now was in 2022 by Strong Refrigeration, and their numbers even escalated that to about $950,000. And so now where we're at is we have another engineering firm taking a look at the options for the plant, and we're right now just right-sizing the scope to the actual money that we've budgeted. So if it's $1 million, we're being very careful and judicious on how we're doing this. So really it is a chiller and a couple of pumps. A chiller is, I think it's 2 chillers are going to cost us about $800,000. And then pumps and extra controls and engineering makes up the remainder of the budget. We'll be looking at doing the dehumidifier in the future, which could be between $250,000 and $450,000, depending on how we do that. So the budget for 2026 and 2027 will be considered for that. And then even other parts of the refrigeration plant, including the compressors, because they still have life in them, we'll be looking at doing them further out into 2033. So the cost of refrigeration plants is not going down. The technology is getting better. And we do have, one of the things that we're doing with this project in particular, in conjunction with the Creston project, we're leveraging those two so we can get some economy of scale and maybe some better purchasing power. But the other thing we're doing is we're tied to a Fortis study that may lead to some rebates and even some funding for enhancements in the future. We're still not there, so I can't say to the commission what the value of those grants could be from Fortis. But the bottom line is that the cost of refrigeration equipment and the work required to install it, decommission, install new is going up every year.
So, Craig, is it too much detail to ask? Is that parts? Is that labor? Is that engineering? Like when you say those costs are escalating, is it spread evenly across those pieces, or is it?
It's the majority. Yeah, through the chair, the majority of the cost is for the components. The mechanical work is expensive, but for example, a chiller, a plate and frame chiller is a very expensive piece of equipment. Not only that, but we'll be tearing out. So there is a component of labor and mechanical work. We'll be tearing out the old chillers and actually cutting a hole in the wall at the NDCC. So there's there's some costs involved in that. But engineering and contingency are still part of that budget as well. Engineering is approximately 10% just to ensure that we've got some structural mechanical that might be secondary to the refrigeration engineering. But it all in it is about $1 million, $1.1 million for the pieces that we need done this year. And like I said, there are future components that will need to be replaced, and those costs will probably escalate as we go down the road.
Kate?
Supplemental, if I may. Is this refrigeration plant just for the NDCC, or is it being shared with the Civic Arena as well?
Yeah, through the chair, we have a district energy plan that sends hot and cold brine. It's not really hot and cold. One is -10 and one is -8 Celsius. It sends it across the road to their refrigeration floor at the Civic Arena, so it does provide cooling capacity for the Civic. So the two chillers that we're getting, one will be for the Civic and one will be for the NDCC. And we do have the plant configured where we have heat recovery that comes off of the expelled heat from the components, and we take that heat and we put it back into the NDCC. So there's a little bit of that involved as well to make sure that we're optimizing our heat recovery, and that is connected to the Fortis studies that we're also doing. But to answer the question, yes, we send cooling capacity over to the Civic Arena.
Is that what that 184 external contribution Nielsen is for?
No,
No,
that's
that's
a
hydro.
long-standing contribution that we do as a result of
Boundary
our
expansion.
requirement of boundary expansion that we contribute that.
Okay.
That one
So
thing.
there are some
Another
letters.
is there, and our boundary expansion grant in lieu decreases every year, but this number stays fixed. This has never had an alignment of reduction in comparison to the reduction that we can run around.
There's a really interesting letters patent during the 2003 boundary expansion where the rural directors and the city of Nelson and the province negotiated that Nelson Hydro would make contributions to these community services where rural areas participated. It could also be expanded based on that language. It could be expanded to things like museums or libraries or theaters if rural areas were, if it was a shared service between everybody, and Hydro could step in and
That's
provide.
184.2.
And that's where the only one that it impacts is this service, because the only one we truly share that meets those criteria.
Sorry, to this, I'm just trying to understand why Red 5 is paying for capital expenses for the Nelson District Community Center since it's a city-owned
The Civic Center.
facility.
Through the chair, that was the agreement back in 2003.
But there'd be a new arena, and that the ice plant would provide for the old arena.
So if you were to borrow, and just note that I'm doing this off my phone, and so it would save. So what you would, this is how I would look at it. You wouldn't make a contribution from reserve to the project. You would borrow. So you'd keep your reserve at 843,000. You may get back, this is only this year, you could get back to 3,560,948 and possibly make a contribution to reserve. The problem is that next year you don't have surplus. So then everything changes after that. So then you have another 259,000 for 2026, no surplus to balance it off. So your requisition in that year, if we weren't to do anything else, would go up to 4088 plus 259. So you'd save it this year, pay for it next year. And now,
And for 5 years.
then it continues on.
So you're adding roughly about 259,000 on every year from 2026 forward for 5 years.
From 2020, well, you have to borrow that sometime in 2025.
Okay.
So right now I'm just doing the simple calculation that it's the whole year, but the borrowing in this case, there are cases where it makes sense, where you actually have, so for example, in Castlegar, and right now, so Castlegar, in 2000, this is 2024, 23, 22, 25. Yeah, so in 2023, they increased requisition by $600,000 and dedicated that to either fund capital or contribute to reserves. It's more complicated because there's two services. So it's 600,000 between the two services. Then it goes to 7. This year it's at 8. Next year it's at 9. Then it goes to $1 million. So in that case, there is some logic to when we borrow, because we know that we have increasing requisitions going forward to account for that. But we don't have that sophisticated of a plan in this service. It doesn't work. The thing that, again, your choices are: we can increase contribution from reserve, fund with community works,
Increase user fees.
Well, increasing user fees is something that we have to do across the district. It's not going to make that much different into 2025.
2026.
It would impact 2026. Yeah. Yeah. Pardon? Well, borrowing saves you this year, but it then impacts every year after.
It costs more over the long time. So what I worked out here, so for 2026, instead of just over 4 million, you'd be looking at more like 4.4 million. And for that requisition in 2027, you'd be looking more like 4.5 million instead of 4.2. In 2028, you'd be looking at more like 4.6 million instead of 4.3.
26% increase.
And then,
next year.
yeah, so instead of a 3% increase, which is what we have budgeted, which is our inflationary increases, we're looking at 6% over those three. And then obviously with taxpayers' dollars, you've spent more money on an absolute basis. It's cost you more to smooth it. You were waving a hand.
Oh, well, I got excited about looking at the presentation from last week where we have 2024 revenue, 753,000 admissions sold. Is that the right number? Is that right? 700, what is that? Is that dollars or is that admissions? I did understand that in this one.
Well, I think that's the one that Tia had flagged that was not correct, but
Right.
I can look.
It's supposed to be 1.5 million. Like this was all a bit wonky.
Yeah, let me come back to you.
Thank you. So I really like the idea, and it wouldn't happen until August, but it will really help us, I think, in the long run at looking at admissions and rentals, because the gym, our 3 times a week hockey player, and rentals as having like a built-in capital contribution, reserve contribution, whatever it is, that's very obvious to people who are, I don't know if that's like illegal in terms of governance, and be like, this is a $1 surcharge or whatever the number is, I don't want to throw a number, that is intended and allocated specifically for reserves. And I just want to throw that out there as we start looking to the fees and charges bylaw in August, that I think there is an appetite for planning for the future and starting to save. Even though we still have 5 years on this initial loan with this kooky interest rate, I think that there is an appetite, like I'm paying down my mortgage, but I'm still saving for my roof. Like it's a total pain in the butt, right?
Yeah.
So that's my comment. Thank you.
Tom, was that hand? Looks like it.
So I think we need to make a decision. So I've heard everything and maybe it's out of order, so I don't know when you want
Give it a whirl.
to make.
Give it a whirl.
I'd like to just move, I've heard everything and at the end of the day, short term and long, I'd like to move the recommendation that the requisition is whatever it was, 3.9, I guess. Just try and find the right document.
3971249.
So a draft financial plan from last meeting for S226, it says the requisition be 3924249.
3971, I believe, too. Oh, sorry, you're right, because I'm looking at the wrong.
Yeah, so I'm just going from the last meeting that we recalled a meeting to discuss options. I don't like any of the options. So I'm gonna move that if it's in order, Chair.
Okay. Is there a second?
And I do, right? Yeah.
Second by
Speak to
Jen.
it.
Yeah, okay, go ahead.
Was it?
To the mover? Yeah, the seconded by Morrison.
Well, I thank everyone for their input, including the public. I looked at this, I've tossed it, I've thrown numbers around, and I went back, I thank Jill for 2017, 2018, 2016, which is why we are here today, is because of those decisions, I believe, and I was part of that process, so I can't bail out. And I'm just looking at the thing I had mentioned to the public about my property tax notice breakdown. So I was off a bit. The RDCK overall is only 41% of your property tax bill, and your fire hall is probably closer to 18% of your property tax bill. I'm in support of this difficult, challenging, 11th time I faced challenging budgets in this service, and I'm moving the recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, the recommendations and moved and seconded, and Graham?
I would be opposed to this, and I think we need to work harder, and I think we need to consider making some cuts. I think Area E&F should consider community works grants, since we can. I think we need to increase user fees, and I think we may consider borrowing in the future. We don't know. Next year, the interest rates could be substantially lower. So for us to say right now we can't borrow because of the rates are so high, I think I think it should be consideration for the future. And the fifth point is that we should be looking for more efficiencies across the regional district, and it's been, especially in this service that is not a core service. It's not one of the core services that the regional district is required to supply. So those would be my 5 reasons why I would be opposed.
Okay. Any other commentary? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you very much for all the deliberations and the commentary on the budget, and thanks for all the hard work of staff. I know it's a big lift every year, and I know you guys aren't even close to done on calculators.
Can I make a comment?
You can make a comment.
So the analysis I did on property taxes, now, it just shows the challenge. So I did an analysis from just on my property tax. I did an analysis of 2011 to 2018 on my property tax bill. And the tax went from $2,700 to $2,695. So it stayed flat for those 8 years. Even a 2% increase during that time would have raised my property taxes to $3,200. So we deficit financed either through not doing stuff, well, basically by not doing stuff, for those 8 years.
Yeah.
And then I get heck, like I didn't get any thanks for the flat. And then I got heck for the increase.
Yeah.
And I actually should have gotten heck for the increase or for the flat because I underfunded many capital things. And then because this service is one of the biggest services, this service suffered through that 8-year period of time where we didn't fund it appropriately, and then things broke down and it was chaotic for many, many years in this, file. But anyway, gotta be careful with keeping taxes flat. It just, in my 10, 11 years, something's not getting done.
Well,
So anyway, I'm sorry, Chair, I just
You're
blurting off and there I go.
I think what's important there is the board has recognized that the piece around asset management and formalizing those contributions, it plugs one of the biggest holes that allowed that latitude to keep flat. Because for future decision makers, that policy work will be in place to determine that you have the asset management and you have to make the contributions you have to make. So that you wouldn't have that kind of wiggle room to say, well, let's just keep it at zero for year after year after year. And that you have, a foundation, a determination as to why it's X, Y, or Z % for asset management. And we're almost there.
In your defense, though, you were paying off a loan. So you were in some ways contributing to the initial capital. So it's quite difficult to first to burden one set of taxpayers, say in their 20 years, with both the debt repayment
Yep.
and the future planning. So
That's the other side of the asset. That's the other side of asset management.
Finding that balance for
Yeah.
sure.
The other consideration here that we never talk about, although some people would say it's pennies or just more laughable numbers, is that we do this borrowing through MFA.
Yep.
So when interest rates were low, we were even lower. And when interest rates have gone up, we are still lower. And I mean, MFA doesn't give the money away. They have to make sure that there's money for the next people that want to borrow money. We're reaping the benefit, we need to go back, this borrowing was for 25 years. If we had been in the commercial market, we would be in a way worse position now than we are, right? Because we're still paying less than the going rate. And that's always the risk. I mean, but it's the risk with the whole house mortgage. Every 5 years you have to renew. And we've been really lucky. And then the renewal on this 5 years has come. And this is now what MFA is saying that they have to charge for the money. It's still less than if we were renewing this through the Bank of Montreal. So there's never any consideration given to that. And this is what happens when you live in this years of low inflation. And, it's like we forgot what inflation is. And some of us around the table are old enough to know that when we first bought our first houses and stuff, we were paying extraordinary. I remember 18% on a mortgage. So 5 sounds like a bonus, but.
That was the savings rate I got when I opened my little baby junior bank account.
Okay, so we won't talk about
In the 80s, I got an 18% interest rate, and I was like, this savings rate makes a lot of sense.
So I just would like to think that in terms of borrowing, we are also borrowing at the best that we can borrow at. And that shouldn't be lost in the discussion.
Yeah, and just so you know, when I was doing the interest rate, it was at 3.1.
Yeah, and I'm moving out that Hell Road because I want to pay Tom's $3,000 tax bill versus my $9,000.
Well, plus, what are we, 800 for water?
My 1360 for water.
Wow.
What's something else?
Non-potable, of course, ours. An in-house system.
I didn't drink mine, but 1360 was
I'll just drink
my
some
residence
toilet.
else paid for.
Okay,
Do you have a septic field?
so
Sorry,
we
I have to go.
Yeah, we have to wrap up here. So our next meeting is going to be on April 30th. We have an all recreation meeting in the middle of that. So we won't be back here for a while. Can I have someone move adjournment? Jason Wilson. And all those in favor, throw your hands up, great, thanks.
I know Director Graham wanted a conversation about user fees and
Yeah, we caught that.
but is that go to all rec?
So that is-
do we have to delay it till the summer or something?
No, the user fee is always it's on the April agenda for
April or August?
April. We set the fees for, the fees get implemented after the September long weekend. But the discussion about fees is in April.
We have all rec in April, we have it at the end of March. 'Cause we have this meeting in April.
April.
It's moved,
Oh.
yeah, it's like.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, people wanted us to move it for the
And
month.
it's in the minutes, all of the requests that Commissioner Graham has asked for, so I imagine they could formulate some discussions. Obviously, some of the questions there, we're not increasing user fees in time past 2025. We cut it through the board, so
Yeah.
those will be addressed during the course of the next year before the 2026 budget discussion start. You have any mentions?
You're in the right. I really feel it. Oh my God.
But
Yeah,
when you do yours?
Yes.
Just I got it.
yeah, I could save you those seconds. Get out of here. Okay, thanks, everybody.